I don't remember that much from when I was a kid, just the normal stuff like being in school and doing things with my friends. But there's one day when I was 14 that stands out, and it's still as clear in my mind today as it was when it happened. This was in 2004, and our house wasn't out of town per se, but wasn't in the suburbs either. We could see our neighbors but still had privacy. We knew the people next door pretty well because they were the closest house to us, and they also had a son who was only a year older than me. I wouldn't say he and I were close friends, but we had grown up around each other. One day in July of that year, I had been home alone in the afternoon because my parents were both at work. At the time, my mom worked normal 9 to 5 hours and my dad was on swing shift, so he would leave around 2:30 and I would be home alone by myself for a few hours until my mom got home. That afternoon, I was sitting on the couch watching TV and doing nothing. I don't remember exactly what time it was, but it wasn't long after my dad left for work, so I'm guessing 3 o'clock in the afternoon. All of a sudden, the TV shut off and our air conditioning stopped at the same time. I thought it was just the living room at first, but after getting up and walking around, I realized the whole house had lost power, so I went out to the side of our house where the breaker box was. I didn't really know much about it then, but my dad had shown me how to check the breaker switches, and it was also where we had a valve to shut off the water to the house. When I opened the breaker box, I could see that all of the switches looked fine, so I figured it had to be a larger power outage in the neighborhood. After a few minutes of wandering around the house, I didn't know what else to do and decided to walk next door to see if their power was out too. As I was walking across our front yard, I could see clouds building in the sky, which was totally normal for a summer afternoon in the Midwest. What was different though was that I could see something partially sticking out on the side of one of the clouds above our neighborhood. I couldn't see any detail really, but it was a single round object. Whatever it was extremely shiny and reflective, like it was catching the sun directly, and the shape and color of it reminded me of a cymbal from a drum set. It had that same warm copper color. This completely stopped me in my tracks, and I couldn't do anything but stand there and stare at it for a second. Then I saw it move. Looking back, I don't know if it had been the cloud or the object moving, but whichever it was, it made me run the rest of the way to my neighbor's house. I remember being pretty seriously worried that it was a plane or a helicopter coming down, and I thought it had something to do with our power getting knocked out. When I rang the neighbor's doorbell, the dad answered, and his name was Jim. Before I could even say anything, he asked if our power was out, so they obviously knew about it. I said it was, then told him what I'd seen in the sky on my way over and expressed my concern about it looking like a plane crashing. He instantly yelled for his wife, and she and their son both ran out the door. Then all 4 of us went into their front yard to look. Everyone could see it perfectly, and we all watched this thing together. This time it was mostly out of the clouds, and I have to repeat myself, it was identical to a giant cymbal sitting in the air. It didn't look like it was moving or spinning or doing anything. It was just there with a reflection of the sunlight on one side of it. Then I remembered Jim getting really nervous and jumpy. I saw their son run back into the house. Then Jim and his wife asked me if my parents were home. When I told them they were both at work, Jim said I should come inside with them. I don't really remember why they wanted to go in, but I know I listened and went with them. While I was in their house, things were tense. Jim and his wife were arguing about something in the kitchen, but I couldn't tell what they were saying. Then 3 or 4 minutes into this, their son ran back out into the living room saying the power was back on. Jim immediately started checking lights and flipping switches. Then he turned on the TV and everything seemed like it was working again. I distinctly remember his wife saying she was going to call the police. Then she and Jim went upstairs. I didn't understand any part of what was going on, and in the middle of the chaos, I told their son I was going home to make sure our power was back on and just walked out the door. When I got outside, the clouds that had been building were heavier and I heard thunder in the distance. I didn't see any sign of that cymbal-shaped thing we'd been looking at, and I looked for it in every direction while walking across my yard. When I got to my house, our power was on again and fine, but I didn't want to go back over to the neighbor's house after that. I just stayed there until my mom got home. I don't know if it was because of my age, but I didn't think very deeply about what had happened. I felt pretty sure that what we had seen was something normal, and we just didn't know what it was. My best guess was the underside of a helicopter. When my mom got home, the only thing I told her was that we had lost power. I didn't mention anything else. Sometime later that week, I had been riding my bike home from a friend's house and got to my neighbor's driveway. Jim was out by the road doing yard work with his son and waved at me, so I stopped to say hi. Right off the bat, I asked if they had ever figured out what happened that day, and both of them looked at me like they didn't know what I was talking about. I asked a second time and even got specific about walking to their house and the four of us looking at an object in the sky. That made them even more confused than the first time, and Jim said they had never lost power or seen anything above the neighborhood, and his son even told me that I hadn't been in their house in years. It turned into the most awkward conversation I think I've ever had because it made me look stupid. I ended up just saying okay in a long, drawn-out way and left to go home. This had been on a weekend, so both of my parents were home, and I finally told them the real story. Neither of them knew what to make of the cymbal-shaped object, but my mom did confirm that we had lost power that day because she said she had to reset the clock on the stove and the microwave and even the alarm clock in their bedroom. They also had no idea why our neighbors would deny any of that happening. I didn't talk to anyone from next door for the rest of that summer because of the way they were acting. It felt like they were avoiding it, and I didn't know why. Later that year, when I was back in school, I ended up sitting next to their son during an assembly completely by chance. Since I hadn't really seen him in so long, I had to ask why they weren't talking about what we all saw over the summer. He denied every bit of it again and said they had never lost power. He also said he never saw anything, and he couldn't have been more adamant that I had not come into their house. What's crazy to me is that he was so honest and serious about it. It was like their whole family had forgotten about what happened. I eventually let it go, and I never really spoke to him or his parents ever again. There was only the occasional wave while passing their house after that, but nothing more. And this has been forever ago, so I don't even know what happened to them. Like I said in the beginning, this childhood memory stands out above most others, and it's something I've never been able to figure out. I know we all lost power, and I know what I saw. What I can't understand, though, is why they would deny something that so clearly happened. Either they were hiding it for reasons I'll never know, or they truly didn't remember. I still wonder what actually caused that outage and what was above our neighborhood during that time. But as I've gotten older, the question that's frustrated me most is, what happened to our friends next door? In the summer of 1982, my wife and I were on a quick one-night backpacking trip in Idaho. We were living there until 1990 and did a lot of hiking and camping because we were young and broke and it was cheap. On this trip, we were at the Bench Lakes in the Sawtooth area right outside of Stanley. That morning, we started early before it got hot, and I remember it was supposed to be a really warm couple of days. We got to the lake before noon and had the whole day there. We were in the water and mostly relaxing, but really didn't do much of anything. For dinner that night, we had one of our favorite entrees, peanut butter sandwiches and instant coffee. Did I mention we didn't have any money back then? We probably went to bed an hour after the sun went down, so 10:30 or 11, and climbed into our older tent that my father had given us. It didn't have any windows on the sides or mesh in the ceiling like newer ones do. It was solid fabric all the way around. Also, we each used to carry a sleeping bag, but we would fully unzip them and use one on the bottom to lay on, and the other would be like a blanket so we could sleep next to each other. Sometime during the night, I opened my eyes and I was flat on my back, staring straight at the top of the tent. What had woken me up was a sound that was like a fluorescent light bulb flickering when the bulb is dying. It was a very distinct electrical clicking noise and completely out of place for where we were. While I was lying there, barely awake and wondering what the sound was, I could see light coming through the fabric on the roof of the tent. I couldn't see the shape of the light or where it was coming from. It was just a diffused brightness hitting the fabric. Then the sound I was hearing gradually got louder as the light got more intense. I wanted to unzip the tent so I could see what was going on, but as soon as I tried to sit up, I felt the most unnatural pressure on my chest and I realized I couldn't get up. It didn't feel like something pushing down on me. It was much more in my back, like I was being pulled down to the ground. It was very powerful, but I could still slightly move my arms and legs. Since I had just woken up though, I panicked like anyone would. I started calling my wife's name, but she didn't even move. Then I got louder and was yelling for her and she still wasn't waking up. I know for a fact I reached over and grabbed her arm, which was right next to mine under the sleeping bag, and I squeezed it hard several times in a row trying to wake her up. She had no reaction to it, and that was the last thing I remember from that night. I woke up in the morning feeling completely normal and was next to my wife, exactly like when I'd gone to sleep. I remember the tent being warm from the sun and I felt perfectly rested. Everything seemed fine. I definitely still knew what had happened in the middle of the night, but it didn't feel any different to me than a bad dream, so that's what I thought it was. By the time we were dressed and making coffee, the experience had already left my mind. We spent half the day at the lake, then got ready to go after lunch. While we were packing up, I just happened to be crouched down next to a pine tree and was knocking the dirt off the tent stakes by hitting them against a root on the ground. While I was down on one knee, I felt a very noticeable vibration through that leg that I'd had on the tree root. It got my attention the second my leg touched it. I stood up and put my hands on the trunk of the tree and I could feel it in both arms. It was about as noticeable as putting your hands on the hood of a car while it's idling. I had to call my wife over to confirm this was actually happening, and she too felt it as soon as she put her hands on the trunk. She even walked over to a different tree about 15 feet away, and that one was vibrating too. We checked 5 or 6 other trees around our campsite, and every one of them had the same feeling. We didn't have the foggiest idea what could be causing it. We both knew this wasn't something normal, but came to the conclusion that it had to be natural and could have possibly been seismic activity underground. We didn't dwell on it and we left as soon as we finished packing things up. While we were hiking back to the car, we couldn't help but check other trees on the lower part of the trail out of sheer curiosity, and not a single one of them was vibrating. It seemed like whatever was causing it had only been around the lake where we were camped. After we got to the car, the weekend was over and nothing else unusual happened. Those 2 days did feel different to me though. Almost 2 months after our camping trip, my wife started getting sick. She would wake up nauseous, sometimes throwing up, and constantly felt tired. After a week of these symptoms, she wasn't getting better and went to see her doctor. I was at work the day she had her appointment, and I'll never forget getting called down to her office and hearing my boss say my wife was on the phone. This is something she never did, so I immediately thought she had bad news. When I picked up the phone, the first thing she said was that everything was fine and she was okay. Then she told me she was pregnant. We had been married for about 4 years at that point, and for the first 3 we weren't trying to have kids. Then in the 4th we felt ready and had spent almost the whole year trying to get pregnant without any luck, so this was a shock and a blessing at the same time. I was overjoyed actually, and I could barely finish my day at work after she told me. That pregnancy was our son, who now has a wife and our 2 granddaughters, but he is our only child. My wife got pregnant 2 more times after him, but both were miscarriages and we never had any other children. It was while my wife was pregnant with him that I started to wonder about the timing of it, and I had this hunch about when our son might have been conceived. It really consumed me and I found myself counting the weeks before her appointment, and as much as I tried not to overthink it, it lined up perfectly with our camping trip. I don't want to get too personal here, but I'm nearly certain that's when it happened. When I realized this, I couldn't stop focusing on it. Everything about that trip was weird, starting with my dream about the light over our tent and being held down and unable to wake up my wife. I also couldn't stop questioning why the trees had been vibrating around our campsite the next morning. It all made me feel like what happened hadn't been a dream, which I had my doubts about anyway, if I'm being honest. I never saw anything outside of our tent, so I can't claim to know what it might have been, but I believe we experienced something real and don't remember it. I think I woke up for part of it and that's what felt like a dream, but it's so foggy in my memory that I just don't know. Then there is the biggest question of all. Did it have something to do with our son being born? The timing was so dead on, it's impossible for me to think it doesn't. It's funny that this quick last-minute camping trip that should have been nothing has stayed with me for more than 40 years, and it seems like the more time that goes by, the more I'm convinced my hunch was right and something really did happen to us. I have always been fascinated by aliens and UFOs. I'm originally from Killeen, Texas, and when I was there, we lived near the Fort Hood military base because my father was stationed there during his time in the Army. It was during this period of my life that unusual events began to unfold for me. When I was young, I started to experience nightmares about being abducted. In these nightmares, I would be placed onto a metal bed and I would be surrounded by figures. The room I would find myself in was gray and blank, and the only thing in it was the bed I was on. The beings that were around me looked like the gray aliens we're all familiar with, but were covered with black skin-tight outfits, and from what I can remember, they would reach out toward my face and I would wake up with my heart racing and filled with adrenaline. Then one night around 11 or 12 o'clock, I had gotten hungry and decided to sneak into our kitchen to get a snack, despite my parents' rule about eating after bedtime. As I was literally crawling past our living room to not be seen, I noticed a terrifying shadowy figure standing behind the window. This figure had an abnormally large head with a very thin neck and body, and it seemed to be looking in the direction I was heading but appeared to be unaware of my presence. Unfortunately, I have no recollection of anything happening after that. These were my very first encounters growing up, but they weren't the last. Years later, in 2012, I ended up relocating to New York, and thankfully my earlier experiences gradually started to fade over time. However, at the age of 23, I began to struggle with sleep paralysis. This is something that happened to me multiple times, and during the paralysis, I would see two alien beings standing in my room next to my bed, and they would watch me intensely until I was able to wake myself up. I remember feeling very angry and aggressive in these situations, and it made me want to physically reach out and hit them. I couldn't do that though because the paralysis made me unable to move any part of my body. I could feel my primal instincts kicking in but was completely powerless. I am also a huge believer in Norse mythology, and I remember feeling like the god of war, Tyr, was with me and trying to help me move. Eventually I would wake up, but when I did, they would be gone. One of these beings even picked up a Tyr necklace that I had placed on the nightstand next to my bed and was looking at it and examining it. These episodes of sleep paralysis changed me in a profound way and made me develop a habit of constantly looking over my shoulder. It was around this time that I had my first sighting. As a massive enthusiast of airsoft and milsim, or military simulation for anyone who might not know what that is, I would frequently drive to Pennsylvania for events. On one such occasion, I happened to be driving back to New York late at night. While I was on the road, I spotted two incredibly white lights in the sky. Both of them were moving at a very slow, steady speed, and the low altitude they were at seemed really strange. I attempted to get a better look at them, but since I had been trying to drive at the same time, I had to focus on the road, which made me lose sight of them and I never saw where they went. 2 months after that sighting, I had been in Pennsylvania again, but that trip had been for a podcast meeting. Just like the first time, I was on my way home, but this one happened in the middle of the afternoon around 3 or 4 o'clock. I had been near Lockport, New York, and saw a large cylindrical object hovering over a vast area of farmland. This object was roughly the size of a private jet, and shockingly, it stayed completely stationary in the sky the entire time. From my perspective, it looked like there were 2 windows or openings on the side of it that was facing me. I could also see some kind of disturbance underneath it that I want to say looked like microwaves moving through the air. As I made my way past this object, I had to go around a large group of trees, and when my view finally opened up again, this craft had vanished. I have shared my story and experiences on the Texas UFO group, and in the comments, people have mentioned that I might have been chosen for some reason, and that's why I've had these recurring encounters throughout my life. Some people have even connected these experiences to my father being in the Army. I really don't know what to think. While I'm not a veteran like my father is, I've always gravitated toward those kinds of things. As far back as I can remember, I've had a huge interest in the military, combat, and firearms, and it's what got me into milsims. Being in that world has taught me how to be acutely aware of what's going on around me in all kinds of situations. It really bleeds into my everyday life and has definitely made me more alert and focused since I started participating in the sport. Because of the many encounters I've had through my life, I now keep a knife holstered to my belt at all times and a 12-gauge shotgun in my car with me when I'm traveling. I feel like my experiences are the reason I'm constantly checking my surroundings. I've also more recently been listening to alien, UFO, and paranormal stories because I can relate to them on such a deep personal level. Finally, I want to say that I've always been a spiritual person, and I don't know why, but part of me feels that these beings know that about me, and it might have something to do with why I was chosen, if I was actually chosen, that is. I also feel like they're curious about me for some reason and keeping track of my growth as a human being because I honestly believe they've been with me my entire life. I constantly have this underlying sense they're watching me, even now as I'm writing this. That sense only becomes more amplified when I'm at home alone and at night, and sometimes it makes me feel extremely uneasy. It's like I'm almost waiting or expecting something else to happen soon. I want to thank everyone for watching another episode of Skywatcher Stories. If you like hearing these personal experiences of strange sightings and alien encounters, please subscribe because I upload new episodes every week and it really helps the channel. Until next time, keep watching the skies.